This talk is a tribute to my dear friend, the late Jerry Schimmel, and it's about Chinese American tokens of mostly the Western United States. And honestly, this is not something I collect. It's not something I know much about, and I don't remember Jerry actually giving a talk about these tokens, but he's by far was the foremost authority. He named me in his will to dispose of his collection, and I have done so for this part of the collection anyway. And it was 2+ double row boxes of Chinese American tokens, many of which I didn't think I would ever be able to get rid of, but it actually turned out to be quite popular. So I gave this talk once before at the World of Coins in December. And okay, so here's Jerry. This is a picture when he was 69, so some years ago. Jerry was a PCNS fellow. In fact, when I was president, I had the privilege of naming him as a PCNS fellow, and by all measures, he was more than deserving of it long before I actually had that privilege, because he was a prolific writer. He wrote many articles, probably hundreds of them. Many of those were first prize essays in both PCNS, but also in the TAMS Journal. And so he was very well known for those articles. But he also was a cataloger. We'll talk about the catalog of the Chinese American tokens, but he also cataloged a lot of other things, especially world tokens. He was an auctioneer. For many years, he ran 40 mail bid sales of mostly foreign coins, and most importantly, he was a friend to all of us and a mentor to many of us, including myself. So let's get on to the topic. The Chinese in the Western United States. Well, of course, they came to California in large numbers first during the gold rush in 1849. And they were, of course, very much discriminated against then and for many years afterwards. And this is a cartoon from the 1870s from the San Francisco Illustrated Wasp. And it shows a man, with a picket sign punching a rather despicable rendition of a Chinese person. And it says the first blow at the Chinese question. And of course, a lot of this had to do with basically out and out racism, and thought, these people are taking my job, that kind of stuff. And, unfortunately, I think this kind of racism still plagues our society in the United States and in some quarters. And recently it seems to have become at the forefront of the news again, which is hard to accept for me. So where are these tokens from? Well, when is first, I guess most of them are from about 1900, maybe the 1890s to around 1940. And they're mostly in the West Coast. This is a census map of the most recent one showing where Asian Americans live in the United States. And you can see that more of them live on the West Coast and on the East, or certainly in the Midwest, and mostly in California. The tokens then are mostly from California, Oregon, and Washington state, and particularly Stockton, San Francisco, Portland, and I meant to say Seattle there. There's a lot from Seattle. So let's just dive into it. And so here's one from San Francisco that I like. It's the Wing Lee tokens for cigars. There's a two cigar denomination as well. This is for 1 and for 5. It was in Chinatown. It's in the directories. The character on the reverse, it says Wing Lee, and it means lush benefit, which is sort of, some of these things don't translate quite so straightforwardly to English, but this was a greeting to the customer and also identified the merchant. This is an odd token in that it's a rare maker, actually. Reininger didn't make very many tokens. I have another one that is a manufacturer's advertising token for the Reininger firm. And you could look at this token, you might think that Reininger and Company is the cigar vendor, but indeed it's not. It's the die sinker, and Wing Lee is the actual merchant. Here's another one from San Francisco, Quang Fat Wing. The Chinese characters mean say on sing, probably not pronouncing it right, which Jerry translated as tranquil prosperity. And this token is actually not traced. We can't find records of it, but the address is definitely Chinatown. So it's certainly a San Francisco token. Now these characters, Jerry didn't read Chinese. In fact, I used to tease him. I said, it's hard enough to collect tokens in English. You're doing one in a language you don't even speak. But he had a friend who was Chinese American who could read these characters. But this is not to say that it was always easy, because many of the characters are archaic and or idealized in one way or another. And so they may be old fashioned and things change, and they're not the same as the modern Chinese script as today. There's another one from San Francisco, the Great Western Social Club, Chinese Social Club. The sign, the symbols on the back mean peaches or autumn. And again, this one wasn't traced, but Charlie Kaplan actually obtained these directly from the Patrick and Company die sinker, and was told they were from San Francisco. So I think we have to believe that. It is hard to identify a lot of these Chinese organizations because they're often not in the English language directories. And there are Chinese language directories or Chinese directories of the West and of San Francisco and some of the other cities. They're rare and expensive, and they're not always scanned. Jerry did have one. Here's another one from San Francisco, and I've showed this one because Jerry's actually discovered this was Namfong, and this was a gambling house on Broadway, right outside of China, or in Chinatown, really. It is cataloged as French Indochina by some cataloger, which is clearly wrong. And part of the reason we know that is that a hoard was found in San Francisco, and Jerry has located that this Namfong club existed on Broadway Street. They're different shapes, were different denominations, and part of this is because many of these people who were gambling were illiterate, and so they couldn't necessarily read what was on it, but they knew the shapes, and so those would be the different denominations. But because this is miscatalogued, it often sells for a lot of money, hundreds of dollars for one of these tokens, and it's not worth anywhere near that because, for one, there's a hoard, and the two, it's not French Indochina. I have tried to correct NGC on this dozens of times, and they don't listen, which is one of the problems with slabbing tokens, is that they don't really know anything about them. So let's move on to Stockton. There are lots of Chinese American tokens from Stockton. This one is the most well-known, the Berlin Company. It was a gambling house as well, the Engwu Tung. They used storefronts as a cover, so it might look like a store, but in the back was all where everything was happening. It was all the gambling. And they actually changed the English names quite frequently. The characters around the periphery of the token translate as the Five Lakes Grotto or the Five Lakes Cave. But it's the ones in the middle that are interesting. The Chinese characters in the center are Chin Bat, which translates as cash 8, which is a slang for 1 mace and 8 kandareens, which is a quarter of a Chinese dollar at the time. And so basically, Chin Bat is 2 bits. That would be what it means, which I think was really interesting. Jerry published in his catalog correspondence with a Chinese American collector who where they went back and forth trying to decide what this really meant. I think it's a very interesting token. They come in other denominations with other different characters in the center. Here's another one, a relatively easy one in some sense because it gives the address and everything in English. The Liyong Company. It was next door to the Berlin Company. It was in business, it was in the directory, so we know it was in business from 1878 to the 1920s, maybe the 1930s. A nice looking token. So this seems like it's pretty easy. Not. Going to get a lot harder. So here's one from Stockton called the Oriental Club. And you look at this token, and it could be from anywhere. So how did Jerry know? Well, a lot of what Jerry understood about these tokens comes from the fact that there were token collectors back in the 40s and 50s, and they obtained these things probably at the source. And this is one of those. It's from one of those old collections, and the old guy said this is from Stockton. Now the closest thing in the directories is the Oriental Independent Society, which easily could be referred to colloquially as the Oriental Club. So yeah, so this is a pretty hard one. And if you didn't have that information, that old collection, you'd probably never be able to figure out where this is from. So this isn't easy, but it gets a lot worse. So here's one also from Stockton, the Chung, and I'm probably not pronouncing that right either, which is that symbol in the middle. And it does have English on it, so that suggests that it is American origin. And it actually is die-sunk with a die-sinker signature of LA Rubber Stamp Company, which means it's almost certainly from California. This one was in two old collections, the McFeeters, which is where that earlier one was from, the Oriental Club. And his note said Palm Club, 119 to 121 West Washington Street. What I've seen in a lot of these is that pine tree and palm seem to get interchanged a lot, even though those trees aren't very similar to me. So I think there's something lost in translation there. And then another old collection noted that this token was Chong Tao, also at that address. So it pretty two independent old time collections put this one in Stockton, and clearly is a California token. And also likely for gambling. It's not good for trade. It's good for a point count. That sounds like a counter in some kind of game. It gets even worse. This is just a restrike. The other side in the real token kind of looks like that. Jerry didn't have this one in his collection, but yeah, the restrike. Chung, but this is a completely different character with a completely different meaning. And it would have a different pronunciation to a native speaker. It would translate, this character translates as prosperity. This also was attributed to Stockton, but reading in the book, attribution seems pretty speculative to me. Let's move on to Seattle. This is another easy one because it's in English, and so if you can find Hua Hing, you can find it. And indeed, this was a store selling Chinese merchandise in Seattle's Chinatown for a long time. And so it's in the directory for many years. It's actually a fairly common token, but apparently quite desirable. Jerry had 3 or 4 of these, and they all sold right away. Here's another one from Seattle, Wami Club. This one was also not only in the directories, but also in the newspapers, and it actually closed in the 80s. It apparently was in a rough part of town. And there were many, the reason it's in newspapers because there's a lot of robberies and shootings and stuff. And I guess there was a fatal shooting or shootout even in 1983, and the bar closed after that. It did note this one is canceled. A lot of the Seattle tokens are canceled in this way. Jerry didn't know what this means. I mean, one could only speculate.
So those are not bullets from the shooting?
No, they are not. They are not. That would make it a, they would be pretty small bullets because they're just punches of some sort. So here's another one that's again hard. The character Fook means fortune or prosperity. Jerry calls this unlocated in Washington State. And it's really, this one is impossible to precisely locate unless someone actually remembered getting one of these in change. This character is often seen, usually in red, on in a restaurant, in Chinese restaurants, trying to wish the customers good fortune. This was also in an old collection. It's what Jerry would say was in the Washington style, and so that's why he puts it in that state. Some of them are less distinctive, and he would say Oregon or Washington as opposed to California. Well, here's one from Portland, the Sun Hop Lee, which Jerry translated with his friend as new gather profit, which again, would mean something completely different to a Chinese speaker. The old collection in this one puts it as the DeRoy Club in Portland in 1958. This token could have been used as late as that. And then here's another one that's, you know, pretty much impossible to well, not, it has not been located. I think it could be. The two characters translate apparently as Nam King. He thought it might be Portland, but he didn't have a definitive proof of that. Let's move on to Hawaii. These two tokens are both from sugar plantation company stores, so used in the standard way that store script from the company store was used. Jerry claims, and I think there's also Richard Griever has done a lot of research on these tokens, that these were made in the 1920s and the 1930s by Moise Klinkner. And in fact, the 936, there are different numbers here on the El Chong token from Impala, but the 936 probably means 1936, according to Richard. And the 882 is probably an employee. And finally, a really unusual token in that it's not from the US in that sense, is the Chowing Sing and Company from Bluefields in Nicaragua. This token was made in Germany. It's very valuable. I sold this token for $775. Federico tells me it's rare, and Nicaragua was very highly collected. Part of the demand is high. There's a chop mark on it that it's hard to make it out, but it's basically the owner's name. So let's just summarize the attributions. Well, some of them are easy because they have an address in English, you know, and so you can, you know, with any luck, you can figure it out. Some are not so easy. They might have a name in English, like the Wahing in Seattle. Some of them are hard. They'll have a name, or what can be thought to be a name in Chinese, like the Nam Fong. That was in English too. And some are really hard, you know, where there's some generic word like good luck or fortune or peaches or, you know, all sorts of pleasant things in Chinese. And some of those may never be able to be attributed. The better attributions from these kind of tokens come from these old collections when they were obtained from the source, and many of those are Stockton. But Jerry was able to do some approximate attributions just from the style and the maker. So Oregon and Washington, you know, they were mixed a lot. Northern California versus Southern California, so that would generally be Moise versus LA Rubber Stamp. Although, of course, you know, some of those Stockton tokens were LA Rubber Stamp too. So to conclude, this is an extremely challenging area to collect, as attribution ranges from difficult to impossible. But actually, you can tell by looking at them that are not of Asian manufacture. The Asian tokens look very different. And I know this is a very subjective statement, but you know, you look at enough of these things and you sort of get an intuition about it. And despite this challenge, the market is very strong. Like I said, I sold 2 double row boxes of this stuff with very little secondary listings. There were 3 or 4, maybe 5 deep pocket Chinese American collectors from all over the country who bid some of these up, you know, to $80, $90, $100 each, which stunned me because you know, I looked at them and thought, you know, what am I going to do? So you know, there's surprises here. I mean, you know, people collect what's interesting to them, and for many people, these are an extremely interesting area. So finally, I just would like to talk about Jerry again. He was a towering figure in exonumia and life in general, really. And I don't believe we'll see the likes of him anytime soon. He was unique. He had many great characteristics, but I think most was he was generous with what he knew. He knew a lot, but he was generous with that knowledge, and he freely shared it with other collectors, not just us, but people all over the world. You know, some of the correspondence I've read is really quite interesting. It's like, Jerry, thank you for sharing your information on this or that or the other thing. And I really miss him pretty much every day. This picture is from a PCNS banquet at the Gold Mirror some years ago. So this is dedicated to him. This is his catalog. I found a box of them at his house. I have one or two left. If anybody's interested, just let me know. So Jason, I think what we'll do now is take some questions.
Thank you, Michael.
Michael, do you think that the die sinkers, did they get the characters from, say, the business or whatever? Because if they were just regular American die sinkers, they wouldn't know the proper character to use. How did they do that?
This is one of those questions that and there are a lot of them like this that I just really would like to ask Jerry. You know, I guess you're right. I mean, the die sinkers made all sorts of mistakes in English. You know, imagine the mistakes they must have made trying to make these characters in a language that was completely foreign to them. So I must imagine that they must have drawn it out. The consignor must have drawn out what he wanted, but I don't know.
So Michael, I have probably what's a dumb question, but I can understand why the gambling or the club establishments would have these almost akin to poker chips. What did traditional merchants make these for? Was it because of shortage of coinage in the Depression, or what was the purpose?
Well, it would be like American, the normal English language tokens of the time. The one for the cigars is probably, a payout from a slot machine. A lot of the nickel-sized tokens were, from San Francisco and elsewhere were from the slot machine. San Francisco is where Charles Fay invented the one-armed bandit, and a lot of times they did pay out in tokens good for cigars. So yeah, I mean, I think sometimes they were used in the normal way that they use tokens for, either advertising or for a small change substitute or to aid in slot machines. But some of these others were clearly for other games of chance, perhaps card games or other gambling games.
Thanks.
So one story of Jerry sharing information. I have some Chinese tokens, not with Chinese characters, but they're clearly Chinese businesses from Watsonville, but the tokens are marked Pajaro. And I put them on token catalog as being Watsonville, Santa Cruz County, and I'd get comments, well, they're in Pajaro, they're Monterey County, but what happened in Watsonville is they ran the Chinese businesses out of town. So they just moved over the bridge into Pajaro, which is right across the river from Watsonville. So they were in fact Watsonville businesses, but they were in Pajaro because they weren't allowed to keep their store in Watsonville. So that having that conversation with Jerry, I came to understand that interaction, and so I steadfastly put them down. These are Watsonville businesses. It's only a matter of racism that puts them across the river, and their customers were in Watsonville, not Pajaro.
Well, it's often said that the interesting tokens tell a story.
Yeah.
In this case, the story is a very unpleasant one.
Right.
And yeah, there are quite a number of those Watsonville tokens that are usually nickel-sized. Not all, but nickel-sized. They're probably that seem like slot machine tokens. If there are no other questions, I'll go on to the other talk.
If I could add just really quick here, I know I just shared Michael's. I had the opportunity to learn a lot from Jerry Schimmel as I was getting into tokens many years ago, and I would say he helped me to identify a lot of crazy Latin American tokens that I had no idea where they were from, but he knew somehow, or he had the tools or the resources, the directories, whatever, to help me identify them. So Jerry was not selfish. He was always collaborating with others and getting stuff identified. And And the other day I was actually talking with somebody from Costa Rica. Jerry had the very first catalog of Costa Rican tokens made, prepared. And to this day, although now we have much better catalogs and the study of Costa Rican tokens has taken off in a great way, Jerry was the seed that planted the genesis of it all, right? So Jerry's place is will be well kept, I guess I would say, or he will always have a place as the originating idea and thinker about Costa Rican tokens in particular. And as we will see later, border tokens, something that we share as well. So, all right, thank you. I just wanted to bring that
You're
up.
right. It goes, his influence went beyond that. I mean, he started the Sales Tax Token Society and wrote the first catalog on those. He wrote the first catalog on German tokens in two volumes. That one remains, pretty much the definitive reference in English of tokens from Germany. And so, the list of his contributions and his accomplishments is very long.